The Thermidorian reaction and the Directory were pivotal moments in the history of the French Revolution, representing the shift from the radical phase of revolutionary politics to a more conservative and pragmatic form of governance. These events marked the decline of the radical Jacobins, the rise of new political factions, and the eventual move toward authoritarian rule, laying the groundwork for Napoleon Bonaparte's rise to power. The Thermidorian reaction, the fall of Robespierre and the end of the Reign of Terror. The Thermidorian reaction, which began in the summer of 1794, was a reaction against the extreme policies and dictatorial leadership of Maximilien Robespierre, the leading figure of the radical Jacobin government. It was named after the month of Thermidor in the French Revolutionary calendar, corresponding to late July in the Gregorian calendar. The period preceding the Thermidorian reaction was characterized by the Reign of Terror, 1793 to 1794, a time when the revolutionary government, under the influence of the Committee of Public Safety, executed tens of thousands of perceived enemies of the revolution in an effort to maintain control during the revolution's most tumultuous period. Robespierre, along with other leading members of the Committee of Public Safety, held almost dictatorial power in France. His relentless pursuit of political purity and his vision of a virtuous republic led to the execution of both royalists and revolutionary moderates. The law of suspects, passed in 1793, allowed the arrest of anyone suspected of being an enemy of the revolution, which created an atmosphere of fear and paranoia. The execution of prominent figures, such as Georges Danton and Camille Desmoulins, marked the most extreme elements of the terror, further alienating potential allies and creating widespread dissatisfaction. By 1794, Robespierre's power had become increasingly isolated, and many members of the National Convention began to fear for their own safety. Robespierre's insistence on continuing the terror, even after France had won several important military victories, made many deputies in the convention believe that the revolution was spiraling out of control. The turning point came on the 27th of July, 1794, 9th of Thermidor, when Robespierre and his allies were arrested. The next day, he was executed by guillotine, along with many of his closest supporters. This marked the end of the Reign of Terror and the beginning of a new phase in the revolution, characterized by a swing towards moderation and political fragmentation. The fall of Robespierre was a dramatic shift in the revolutionary politics of France. The violence and fear that had permeated the previous years began to subside, and many of the radical policies of the Jacobins were reversed. The power of the Committee of Public Safety was greatly diminished, and a more moderate government emerged. The aftermath of the Thermidorian reaction. Following the fall of Robespierre, the National Convention sought to restore order and stability in France. The removal of the radical Jacobins did not result in a complete return to pre-revolutionary politics, but it did signal a shift away from the extreme left toward a more conservative and pragmatic approach. The period following the Thermidorian reaction saw the dismantling of the institutions associated with the terror, including the Revolutionary Tribunal and the law of suspects. The political landscape of post-Thermidor was marked by the rise of the so-called Thermidorian faction, a coalition of former Girondins, moderate Jacobins, and other conservatives who sought to distance themselves from the violence of the terror. The National Convention repealed many of the harshest laws passed under Robespierre, including the law of the maximum, which had imposed price controls on essential goods. This shift towards economic liberalism was intended to stabilize the economy, but it also led to rising food prices and economic hardship for many working-class Parisians. Politically, the Thermidorian reaction led to the weakening of the radical left and the consolidation of power in the hands of the bourgeoisie. While the convention sought to re-establish the rule of law and order, it faced constant challenges from both the radical left and royalist factions, each of which sought to impose their own vision of France's future. The Directory, a new government structure. In the wake of the Thermidorian reaction, the National Convention faced the task of establishing a new political order. This led to the creation of the Directory in 1795, a 5-member executive body designed to replace the Committee of Public Safety. The Directory was established under the Constitution of Year 3, which sought to balance the power of the executive with that of the legislature. While the Constitution of 1795 established a bicameral legislature with the Council of 500 and the Council of Ancients, the Directory was vested with executive power, making it the ruling body of France for the next 4 years. The Directory was composed of 5 directors who were chosen by the Council of Ancients from a list of candidates nominated by the Council of 500. The directors were expected to work collectively to manage the affairs of the state, though in practice, the Directory often became a power struggle between different factions and individuals. The executive body was initially seen as a moderate and pragmatic solution to the political instability of the period, but over time, it became associated with corruption, inefficiency, and political intrigue. One of the main challenges facing the Directory was the need to stabilize the French economy. France was deeply in debt due to the costs of the Revolutionary Wars and the financial strain caused by the economic policies of the preceding years. The Directory sought to address these issues by instituting fiscal reforms, but these measures were often ineffective and unpopular. The continued economic instability, along with food shortages and rising inflation, contributed to widespread discontent with the Directory. In addition to economic challenges, the Directory also faced threats from both the radical left and the royalist right. The radical left, represented by the Jacobins and other revolutionary factions, sought to reinstate more radical policies, while the royalists sought to restore the monarchy. In 1795, the royalists staged an uprising in Paris, known as the Vendémiaire Uprising, but it was suppressed by troops under the command of Napoleon Bonaparte, a rising military leader. Napoleon's intervention in this and later events would prove crucial in his ascent to power. The decline of the Directory and the rise of Napoleon. Despite its early efforts to maintain order, the Directory faced mounting opposition from both within and outside of France. The political instability of the period was compounded by military defeats in the wars with the European coalitions, and the Directory's inability to resolve France's financial problems only fueled disillusionment with the regime. The continued economic difficulties and the lack of effective leadership led to growing public dissatisfaction. The Directory's downfall came in 1799, when a coup d'état known as the 18 Brumaire was carried out by Napoleon Bonaparte and his supporters. Napoleon, who had gained fame as a military leader in the Revolutionary Wars, took advantage of the political chaos to seize power. The coup resulted in the establishment of the Consulate, a new government in which Napoleon held absolute power. The fall of the Directory marked the end of the Revolution's most chaotic period and the beginning of Napoleon's rule, which would eventually lead to the creation of the French Empire. The Thermidorian reaction and the Directory were crucial stages in the French Revolution, marking the decline of the radical revolutionary phase and the rise of a more conservative and pragmatic political order. The Thermidorian reaction ended the reign of terror and signaled a shift toward moderation, while the Directory, though intended to stabilize France, was marred by political instability, corruption, and economic difficulties. Ultimately, both the Thermidorian reaction and the Directory set the stage for the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, whose ascent to power marked the end of the revolutionary experiment and the beginning of a new era in French history.